Hello. I thought today I'd say something about compassion because I've been thinking about it. And yes, one of my meditation practices for the last nearly 20, nearly 23 years has been really about contemplating compassion, about meditating with compassion, and in particular the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. But I still come back time and time again to asking, what is compassion? What is compassion? And questioning myself as the degree to which I have developed compassion. I was realizing that compassion has a lot of different elements to it. So sometimes we can mistakenly think that compassion is about being overwhelmed by suffering, being terribly moved by suffering, and being really upset by suffering and so on. And I'm not saying that that's not some aspect of compassion, but actually when we are overwhelmed by suffering, it's usually coming from fear. And fear has no part in real compassion. When I'm talking about real compassion, I'm talking about enlightened compassion. So it's very easy to be overwhelmed by fear. And of course, at the moment, that's very likely to be happening with the coronavirus and, hearing all the worst of the news and so on. But compassion has various elements that that maybe we don't necessarily associate with compassion. So it certainly has wisdom within it, or alongside it, however you like to see it. But there is no compassion without wisdom, because it's wisdom that helps us to act appropriately. It's wisdom that understands how to put it. It has a perspective. It has the perspective that the Buddha gave us. In other words, it has sort of truth underlying it. We can't get rid of suffering, and we see that living beings are driven by greed, by aversion, and by delusion. And that delusion focuses in particular on this tight way that we see ourselves and the way that we give preference to ourselves. And that means that it's really hard to be other-regarding. So as long as we're totally self-regarding, it's very hard to be other-regarding at the same time. So being other-regarding includes ourselves, but not in an exclusive way. So certainly compassion is about being other-regarding, with a wisdom of reality that sees the brevity of life, for example. That's really important, to see impermanence and suffering as they are, not as something terrible, not as some disaster, but as part of our life, as part of our human life. So I was listening to a talk yesterday. It's called The Coronation by Charles, I can't remember his surname, but I think it would be easy to find. Anyway, I haven't heard it all, but one thing that he was talking about that was quite interesting, he was talking about, this lockdown phase that we're in and weighing it up, all these children that maybe are going to spend months at home, what sort of influence is that going to have on them, and weighing it up against people dying, maybe himself or his mother, he was saying, and how do we weigh up what lives are worth? It's really a very difficult, impossible task to do that. But yes, he was questioning the kind of decisions that are made around keeping us safe. and he was saying how much safety has become the real, the primary motivator today, that's behind government decisions and so on. And he was saying that when he was young, he could be playing a mile from home, and nowadays, you'd have the social services coming to see you if your child was playing far from home. So, yes, in a way, I thought his talk was very compassionate, but on the surface, it didn't necessarily look like it. And why I say it was compassionate, because it had a broad perspective about about group mentality, really, about decisions that are made that maybe we're forced to go along with, that aren't necessarily the most helpful for those beings that really need help. Anyway, that's a bit of a ramble. Coming back to compassion, so it's got this intelligence behind it. It's got perspective behind it. It's got the reality of impermanence and suffering behind it. So it's not fighting, it's not fighting reality. So it will help in the most appropriate ways. And that doesn't always appear as we might imagine compassion would. But how can we get our heart more engaged with compassion? Obviously with the metta bhavana, the karuna bhavana, with empathizing with other people, but not getting overwhelmed, not getting fearful around it. Not an easy subject to talk about in a few minutes, but anyway, I'm going to leave it there for today. Bye for now.